welcome. You're watching Trending Tonight with me, Sanket Upadhyay. Those pictures that you on your screen right now are of a press conference, a statement, perhaps not a press conference, by the American President Donald Trump. Only yesterday, news coming in of a retaliatory action by Iran. This is in retaliation to the taking down or what is being referred to in Iran as the assassination of Qasim Soleimani, a senior leader, a man who was tipped to be perhaps even the next president of Iran. Huge sea of support for him. There has been retaliatory action, and Donald Trump assured by way of tweets, these days even wars are fought on Twitter, he tweeted by saying that all is well and I'm going to address the nation tomorrow. That is according to the time in the United States. So there it is. In just a short moment, 9:30 p.m. IST is when that statement was expected. The stage is set. Those doors will open any minute now, and Donald Trump will come out and address. Before we move any further, let's just explain what exactly happened. Here's my colleague Vishnu breaking it down for you.
Cell phone footage of Iranian ballistic missiles slamming into Al-Assad air base in Iraq. Retaliation for the U.S. elimination of this man, General Qasim Soleimani, the foremost military commander not just in Iran but the entire Middle East. At least 12 ballistic missiles targeted Al-Assad and Erbil, places where U.S. personnel were housed. The reaction? This tweet from the U.S. President where he says, "All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good." And as significantly a statement from the Iranian foreign minister that this is where his country wants the hostilities to end. "We do not seek escalation or war, but will defend ourselves against any aggression." As significantly, a claim from Iraq that Iran had warned it of an impending attack. There's been no immediate American military retaliation, but instead claims from Tehran that at least 80 Americans had been killed.
Every Iranian became happy. We retaliated because we are not a beginner, but only defensively we retaliated based on our people demand.
The immediate fallout of today's Iranian strike was on air travel. The U.S. Federal Aviation Authority has ordered American airlines not to operate in airspace over Iraq, Iran, the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. For India, there is little to do except to wait and watch. India's aviation watchdog has told NDTV that they've already been in touch with airlines, and this includes advice that they may avoid the airspace of both countries. There's also a travel advisory urging Indian nationals to avoid all non-essential travel to Iraq, which was struck. But some chief ministers are worried. Punjab Chief Minister Amrinder Singh has urged the foreign minister to be ready with a plan of safety and security of around 10 million Indians living in Gulf countries. But oil prices have taken a big hit. Brent crude futures have hit a 4-month high. Asian stocks have slumped. This comes at a terrible time for India, looking to get out of an economic slump itself.
Hopefully not see a war. This is definitely an escalation among the United States, which is an ally, and Iran.
The next clue on what happens next is when the U.S. President speaks in the next few hours. Will he announce retaliatory strikes? In other words, will there be open war in the Middle East? A frightening reality for millions, not just in the region, but around the world. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
All right, joining me right now is foreign policy expert Kamar Aga, as well as strategic affairs expert Brahma Chellaney, and with us also is NDTV's very own Vishnu Shom, joining us in just a short moment. Mr. Chellaney, let us begin with you first. What do you think will be the likely response of President Trump? And I ask you this question because there was an interview that was given by the foreign minister of Iran, who says that we have responded appropriately in order to just protect our interests. He's talking about an escalation just to avenge what the United States did. Do you think that there is some sign that this will not escalate into a full-blown war?
The Americans were expecting Iranian retaliation. Retaliation was inevitable because without some reprisal or the other, the Iranian regime cannot survive at home. So the Americans were expecting retaliation, and they had braced up to face retaliation by repositioning their forces in Iraq, which they expected to be the likely target of Iranian attack. And therefore, the absence of American casualties in the Iranian retaliation should not come as a surprise. But I think the President of the United States, when he addresses the nation, is unlikely to announce any further escalation because he's facing heat both at home and abroad for the Soleimani strike. The Democrats are accusing him of acting recklessly. America's own allies like Britain, France, and Germany have distanced themselves from the Soleimani assassination. And Trump, in election year, does not want to start a new war in the Middle East. And if he were to respond militarily to the Iranian retaliation, then the risks of war increase.
All right, Kamar Aga, we were there in an earlier broadcast and we were talking about retaliation and how far this is going to go. What do you expect from this statement? If that tweet of his earlier in the day was anything to go by?
You see, there are one or two things, you know. In fact, Brahma Chellaney has said a very valid point, you know, that American economy also doesn't permit another war. People are divided. People don't want a war. They don't have any further appetite for a war. And administration as well as the Congress is also divided. But look, American policy is of that regime change in Iran. They have adopted a policy of containment and imposed sanction on the Islamic Republic, you know. Most rigorous sanction ever imposed on any country in the world, you know, that is Iran facing. So ultimate goal is regime change. Now there are two ways. One is through sanctions, you know, that is possible. That is very difficult to change the regime. And many people within the administration, American administration, are calling for a war with Iran. Openly, you know. Bolton was one of the most prominent. He has resigned.
But domestically in the US also there is a divided opinion.
There is a divided opinion.
On this attack itself?
Attack itself, you know. So therefore, you know, I don't know how he's going to handle, you know, it is still early to say, let's wait and watch, you know, what they're saying. And we have seen in the past, the president doesn't compromise, you know. Once he made up his mind, you know, he has a team of people. He liked those who encourage the same ideas, you know.
Correct.
Preferred those.
Correct.
So
there have been many sackings as well.
Many sackings as well, you know.
Okay.
So therefore, you know, it's difficult, you know, but war means, you know, would be a major catastrophe for everybody.
For everyone, not just these two nations.
Americans are not worried because they have oil.
Okay.
They have sufficient oil, but economy would, global economy would.
Vishnu, I wanted to talk to you about these military bases of the US, their military interests in that region. This attack, how significant do you consider this attack by Iran on US bases?
It's an extremely significant attack, Sanket. Whenever you use ballistic missiles, it ups the ante to the very next level. The fact is, over here, they've launched at least 12 missiles. Irrespective of how many hit, the fact that they were willing to do this is an indicator of serious intent. Now, in just the last 15 minutes or so, the first images apparently have started coming out of the impact on the Al-Assad base. And it
22 missiles will launch.
Well, 12, I believe, is the total number, between 12 and 15. The US claims, according to some sources, a few were intercepted, a few were duds as well. But at least 4 to 5 impact points at the Al-Assad base is what these digital labs, satellite imagery, high-resolution images, which have been coming out now on Twitter for the last little while, seem to indicate. So we're just trying to get hold of that to see if we have rights to actually publish those images and double-check it.
And how much is the damage?
The damage indicates one of the hits is between two hangars, right? And it appears to have destroyed both the hangars. There is another hit very close by to that particular hangar, perhaps within 15 to 20 feet of it. Then a few hundred meters away, there is a third hit again on very close to either a hangar or a hangar has been destroyed entirely. And then 2 further hits which I noticed somewhat further away. So this is very much at the heart of this particular base, this American base. But I think it's very clear that America would have evacuated this base. Trump's initial remarks, his initial tweet clearly indicated that they were aware that their initial count sort of indicated that there were no fatalities, and that's important. I think that's what we need to actually look on now, because by not making a speech earlier in the day or an announcement earlier on in the day, it seemed to indicate that he would argue, and let's see if that's the case, that look, not very much has happened.
No, but if his tweet is anything to go by, we know
and you need to read it, Sanket, along with what the Iranian foreign minister has said. The Iranian foreign minister has offered the United States an off-ramp by clearly saying that we don't want to escalate this into a full war. If there are no American casualties, then perhaps that won't happen. But as you said, who knows what Trump has on his mind.
Brahma Chellaney, just taking this conversation forward, impact of any escalation. First of all, the question that I asked you at the very beginning, is there escalation likely? Second question is going to be, how far are these two countries willing to take this escalation? Where does this end?
Well, on the second question, this is not just a US-Iran crisis. This has become an international crisis affecting the economies and security of many countries. If you look at India, this will have a cascading effect on India's economy at a time when India's economy is already slowing in a very perceptible manner. Higher oil import bill will translate into inflation in India, also translate into higher manufactured costs, higher transportation costs in India. So it's an international crisis in a true sense. Second, Iran is facing very heavy sanctions that have been imposed by the Trump administration. There was no Iran crisis when Trump took office. He has engineered this crisis by walking out of the nuclear deal with Iran. And these developments that we have seen in recent days are the culmination of Trump's hardline stance towards Iran. So Iran will try to prolong this crisis this year right up to the election period in the United States, up to November, because they do not want Trump to be re-elected. They would like to undermine his presidency, show him to be unstable. So there will be Iranian provocations later this year. I will not be surprised if in the coming months we see a further escalation of the US-Iran conflict.
Oh, okay. Kamar Aga, I want to ask you this very important question. So far it was seen that America has been trying very hard to get an American dispensation in Iraq. They have an ongoing crisis with Iran. This has been on for a very long time. Do you think that this action of executing, of killing Qasem Soleimani on Iraqi soil could somehow have tilted the odds against the United States, perhaps Iraq and Iran slightly more harmonious in their references to one another? For instance, you've got Iraq right now which is saying the US must vacate, they must go.
Yeah, and that security cooperation agreement has been ended by the Iranian parliament. Second thing, once again I would reiterate one thing. Americans believe that if the Iranian regime collapses, then the Syrian regime will collapse, and Iraq would be having a better ties with the United States, and Houthi tribes, will not be able to fight longer with the Saudis, and in Yemen, the Hezbollah would be weakened, So therefore, and second thing, the American major interest in the region is oil. And this region, Syria, Iraq, Iran, they have huge reserves of oil. And Americans, in fact, Rumsfeld has once said that Iraq is floating on oil.
Correct.
So this policy is going on since the time of President George Bush, this regime change, and at that time they said Iran is part of axis of evil.
Absolutely.
All these things, we have been hearing since long, and this administration, when it came, reiterated same old stand to an extent, and other thing, that the Saudi and the UAE, these are the two regimes, now they are willing to negotiate with the Iran also, because they have come to realize that they cannot fight a war, and secondly they also realize that America will not be able to defend in case of the war. So the best thing is to make a deal with Iran. And indirect talks were going on. In fact, the Iraqi president was involved, Iraqi prime minister was involved in these negotiations, and the day when this Qasim Soleimani was killed, according to the Iraqi president, he was bringing an Iranian message to Saudi Arabia, which he was supposed to take it there,
So you're saying that there are too many cross interests over here for any escalation to take place?
There are too many.
Okay, Vishnu, now in terms of these strategic bases, one is the Al-Assad air base, and you have told us about its importance. If you could just tell us what other strategic interests does the United States have in that region, in other countries, which could be jeopardized with an act like this?
So that's really important, Sanket. Because Iran has said that any retaliation is not going to be restricted to American facilities just in Iraq. But speaking about Iraq, these facilities, these bases, Al-Assad is a very important base. It has drones, it has American attack helicopters, it had a sizable amount of NATO personnel as well, America's very close allies. But in the area, America operates in Manama, one of the largest fleets in the world, aircraft carrier battle groups. They've got facilities in Kuwait, they've got facilities in the United Arab Emirates with a massive presence, air force presence, which would be used in any offensive operation against Iran. The United States has deployed F-35 stealth fighters in that area. In the last little while, they have moved B-52 bombers to Diego Garcia, that's far out in the Indian Ocean, but those are ultra long range. They would be used if this really became a very, very big sort of military fight. But at this juncture, I don't think it's headed in that direction. I should also point out, and I think this is a key point, unless there are boots on the ground, you don't typically win a war. So there could be an air battle, but would that be enough to hypothetically bring the Iranian government to the table? And I would argue that that's not the case. So therefore, if there is to be boots on the ground, what are the numbers that you're looking at? And I would argue that you would be looking at numbers of upwards of 50,000 American soldiers to 1 lakh American soldiers on the ground and deployed in various areas to be able to get access to Iran for a fight which is going to be a very, very difficult fight. And Iran is a very large country, let's remember. Let's also try and understand the points of access of these soldiers, American forces. Turkey and America at this stage have a very poor relationship. Iraq and America have a reasonably strained equation at this present juncture. To believe that forces would be deployed into Iran through Afghanistan is also problematic, because America is withdrawing at this juncture from Afghanistan to again go back over there in those numbers through the threats that they would face in Afghanistan raises questions by itself. So these are questions to which there are no real answers. I don't believe that America could successfully defeat Iran in a ground battle just through amphibious operations by landing soldiers onto Iran. So this is going to be, if this does end up being a war-type situation, one that would typically involve American cruise missiles. That's the way it operates, in large numbers, which would take out strategic targets, tactical targets, perhaps Iranian nuclear targets, Iranian air defenses primarily, firstly. And then you'd move into bombing of specific targets, trying to minimize collateral damage. But Iran would perhaps sustain a lot more than other countries which are much smaller. And let's not forget about the Iranian military. They have modern surface-to-air missile systems, including the Russian S-300 system. We are acquiring in India the S-400, the S-300, somewhat older, but still considered very capable. And remember, they still have lots of ballistic missiles, which can be used to target American bases across the region. And I think there's one more important point over here. Strategic ballistic missiles did strike these targets. They did hit, they weren't intercepted. What stops these from being launched to hit other American facilities in other parts of the Persian Gulf.
So it's very clear, and I think this is a very interesting understanding of where this situation or the escalation is at this moment. How far can America take it? Brahma Chellaney, I want to ask you another important point. You were briefly mentioning about its impact on India, its economic impact on India. If there will be tension and instability in that region, one more reason to be concerned about will be the population that we have, the Indians who are staying in that region, many of them working in the Gulf. Do you think that this instability is going to bother the Indian government on that front as well? Or is that perhaps a distant possibility?
Well, the Indians are dispersed in a number of countries across the Gulf region and North Africa. There are not many Indians living in Iran or Iraq. So any mass evacuation of Indians may not be required if there was a US-Iran war. But I think the direct impact on India's strategic and energy interests would be quite obvious if this conflict between the US and Iran were to escalate. For example, India's transportation corridor to Afghanistan that bypasses Pakistan and goes through Chabahar, that project would be jeopardized because the Iranians are not happy with India's full compliance with American sanctions, and they have been threatening to bring China into Chabahar if India does not complete the Chabahar project within reasonable time. And they don't like the fact that India is so compliant with US sanctions. They have been telling India, look at China, it's still importing oil from Iran, it's still investing in Iran, but you guys have completely opted out. And therefore, the Iranians look at China as a more reliable partner than India. And if India's interests get hurt in this manner, then India's interests in Afghanistan would be seriously compromised. So the repercussions for India are quite serious, and Trump is contributing to the larger implications for India by raising India's oil import bill. That oil import bill has been rising ever since Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in May 2018. So India's oil import bill has risen continuously since then, and the more recent surge in oil prices means a further drain on India's foreign exchange reserves. So Trump's actions have not been good for India.
Kamaraga, would you like to weigh in on that?
Absolutely right. I fully support him.
Because there is also a section which feels that since we are not importing oil from Iran, so technically the impact of this conflict.
We have diversified, that.
No, but then I think that's a significant point that he mentioned.
He made a very significant
problem.
I just want to add one more thing. India doesn't want Iran to join once again Pakistan, China, Turkey axis, because Iran was part of CENTO alliance throughout the Cold War era, and we have suffered a lot, because that brought Cold War to our doorstep. So India's policy is to keep Iran, with us. We don't want, we are not importing oil, we are not having, but still we are negotiating with Iran. We are trying to convince Iran, and Iran also doesn't want us to totally align anywhere. They want us to remain neutral. So this is a very
Iran wants us to remain neutral.
At least, if not pro-Iranian, then remain neutral. Because today also
which we do. Our foreign policy is that we
to make relationship. Yeah, that's true. So even the Iranian ambassador today said to one of the channels, that India is a friendly nation. We have a good relation. We have been discussing all our things with India. And India is one country, which could in future also negotiate with American, Iranian, Saudis, UAE, as well as the other countries of the region, because India is in a very good position, in case if this comes. I don't see in near future, but there is a possibility. And second thing, American, I believe, I don't know, I mean, it's just a guess, Americans have already announced 52 targets in Iran. Shom was mentioning some of them, and they said that we have prepared, and they have also said that oil installations or other places, because the policy of the containment in that policy, sanction plus target, the target which they have identified could hit, not in near future, but in a near distance, because as Brahman said, this conflict will continue,
Correct.
For more time to come.
Absolutely. In about a minute from now is what the announcement has been made. Donald Trump may come. His book from which he will read, and those teleprompters have now been activated. Vishnu, another important point is that Jawad Zarif...
Prepared statement, Sanket.
Prepared statement.
That gives us some hope that there won't be a war.
It's a prepared statement. You can see those teleprompters on screen. Vishnu, the Iranian Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif is scheduled to visit India next week.
I wonder if he will.
Raisina dialogue. It has not been cancelled so far.
Right.
This is going to be his first big international visit, if it happens, after the death of Qasem Soleimani.
Yeah.
How significant do you think a statement can he make? Should he choose? I know this is an extremely hypothetical question, but how significant will India's land be to make a statement to the world?
Look, India is going to be watching and looking at this very, very closely, because this visit by the Iranian foreign minister to India has been planned for a while. Remember, over the weekend, India has spoken, the foreign minister has spoken to Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, and has also spoken to the Iranian foreign minister. He's explained to Mike Pompeo India's stakes in the region, and has also spoken to Iran by saying that, we have concerns about this developing situation. India has immense concerns in this entire region, at least 7 million Indians over there. Remember, there was a tweet by, among others, Amrinder Singh today, the Punjab Chief Minister, saying that do we have an evacuation plan in mind? In the Gulf War earlier on, remember, India had carried out the biggest evacuation of all time. So now the numbers are significantly larger. And I should also mention, and this is news coming in the last 1 hour or so, 1.5 hours or so, the Indian Navy has deployed a warship in the Persian Gulf region. That's not uncommon, but this has been done to reassure Indian tankers operating in the Persian Gulf region that the Indian Navy is there and alive to this situation.
Okay, Vishnu, I'd like to stop you there. As you can see these pictures, that's preparation for Donald Trump to arrive so that he can read out his statement. How's this usually done, Vishnu? I mean, I'm unaware. Have you ever seen...
Donald Trump would usually come out alone and then make that statement. But the fact that he's got a couple of people over there, including military leaders,
I think that's his team.
Makes me wonder if there'd be more than one statement, and whether others would actually say something as well. And I think it's also, we would really want to know if there are any questions which would be taken. It's all...
No, there are journalists right there. I can see that there are journalists.
The White House Corps would be there, but whether they'd be allowed to take questions, this is just a prepared statement or not. With the teleprompters, it appears that he's going to be reading from them, reading from something which has been prepared. So Donald Trump obviously on his way down as we speak. And to make this all in, the entire world is going to be watching this. The Iranian government will be watching this very closely.
Earlier in the day, what do you make of his tweet earlier in the day where he says all is well, then he talks about...
Precisely, all is well, and...
all right, the doors have opened, Donald Trump is here. Let's listen in to what the US President now has to say.
As long as I'm President of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Good morning. I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. No American or Iraqi lives were lost because of the precautions taken, the dispersal of forces, and an early warning system that worked very well. I salute the incredible skill and courage of America's men and women in uniform. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. Last week, we took decisive action to stop a ruthless terrorist from threatening American lives. At my direction, the United States military eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. As the head of the Quds Force, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the absolutely worst atrocities. He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs that maim and dismember their victims. Soleimani directed the recent attacks on U.S. personnel in Iraq that badly wounded 4 service members and killed 1 American, and he orchestrated the violent assault on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. In recent days, he was planning new attacks on American targets, but we stopped him. Soleimani's hands were drenched in both American and Iranian blood. He should have been terminated long ago. By removing Soleimani, we have sent a powerful message to terrorists. If you value your own life, you will not threaten the lives of our people. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. In recent months alone, Iran has seized ships in international waters, fired an unprovoked strike on Saudi Arabia, and shot down 2 U.S. drones. Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Instead of saying thank you to the United States, they chanted death to America. In fact, they chanted death to America the day the agreement was signed. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration. The regime also greatly tightened the reins on their own country, even recently killing 1,500 people at the many protests that are taking place all throughout Iran. The very defective JCPOA expires shortly anyway and gives Iran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time has come for the United Kingdom anyway and gives Iran a clear and quick path to nuclear breakout. Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. The time that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place. We must also make a deal that allows Iran to thrive and prosper and take advantage of its enormous untapped potential. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. Over the last 3 years, under my leadership, our economy is stronger than ever before, and America has achieved energy independence. These historic accomplishments change our strategic priorities. These are accomplishments that nobody thought were possible, and options in the Middle East became available. We are now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. We are independent, and we do not need Middle East oil. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent. 3 months ago, after destroying 100% of ISIS and its territorial caliphate, we killed the savage leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who was responsible for so much death, including the mass beheadings of Christians, Muslims, and all who stood in his way. He was a monster. Al-Baghdadi was trying again to rebuild the ISIS caliphate and failed. Tens of thousands of ISIS fighters have been killed or captured during my administration. ISIS is a natural enemy of Iran. The destruction of ISIS is good for Iran, and we should work together on this and other shared priorities. Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, a very important statement, a lengthy one from the U.S. President. I think the last part of it, very, very important. We want you, Iran, to have a great future, ready to embrace peace with those who seek it. But I think most importantly, there will not be any war, at least now, at this juncture. He began by saying Iran will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. He said that in the Iranian ballistic missile strikes, minimal damage was caused. No Americans were harmed. No Iraqis were harmed. There was an early warning system in place which indicated that an Iranian ballistic missile attack was imminent. He then went and spoke at great length about Iran being a terrorist state, how Soleimani was a ruthless terrorist. But I think the big upshot of all of this is that as we had hoped and in a sense predicted, there will not be a war right now. Brahma Chellaney, come in on that. I think this is welcome news that this is where it ends. It's hard to imagine that America, after having received a ballistic missile attack, has chosen the off-ramp based on what Iran has said.
Because the first round clearly has gone in Trump's favor. Mm-hmm. Trump is the clear victor. He carried out the assassination of a foreign leader, and in response, that foreign country responded in a manner that has not caused any real damage to the U.S. in terms of lives or treasure. So Trump certainly does not want escalation of the conflict with Iran in an election year. But
right.
the priorities and the imperatives in Tehran could be different. This could not be the end of the story for Tehran, because Tehran would come out the loser if it were to do nothing beyond what it has done last night. So I suspect that there will be a pause in Iranian attempts to do something against the U.S. They will probably, in the coming months, carry out proxy attacks, deniable attacks, to put pressure on the U.S. and, more importantly, to damage Trump's re-election prospects.
Yep. All right. I mean, that certainly has been the strategy. This battle of this proxy battle, this hybrid warfare, which Soleimani, in fact, had been a master of. Mr. Agha, let me come to you next. I think this is welcome news that there will not be
it's a big relief,
war
you know,
right now. I take Brahma's point entirely that this is just a chapter in an ongoing saga, as it were. But this means that millions will perhaps survive. If there was a war, anything could have happened.
Yeah, that's true, you know. I think it's a big relief for everybody, for the region and for India and for the Western Europe. You see, a lot of pressure was put on Americans also, European, particularly from the European nations. Then the Saudi and the UAE were also impressed President, you know, not to escalate further war in the region. Plus, Iranians have also gave a message by not hitting the main target, you know. It's just a messaging that they have taken the revenge, you know, and public opinion, they have gained enough public opinion, public support also. They said that we wanted to show our people, they have done it. So that way it is good, and it looks, you know, war will not take place, but low intensity, as Mr. Brahma Chellaney was mentioning, insurgency would continue in that region, and that is going on for ages, for decades, you know. That would continue, bombing here and there.
So, Dr. Chellaney, give me your views, because hearing Trump, it seemed like a re-election speech, because he hit out once again, perhaps in his strongest language ever, on the nuclear deal of the Obama administration. He called it a foolish deal. He said that the last administration effectively paid for the ballistic missiles which were used in this attack, and he went on and on and on about that. So was that what this was all about? I mean, trying to gain political capital from a very domestic for a very domestic constituency ahead of re-election.
He has faced a lot of criticism at home and abroad for carrying out the assassination of General Soleimani. So as you noticed, he spent most of his time focusing on the Soleimani angle, why he ordered the assassination of General Soleimani. So much of his statement today was justification of the Soleimani strike. He was trying to address the critics at home and abroad who say that he acted very recklessly in ordering the assassination of General Soleimani, because the Americans have not carried out the assassination of a foreign leader since World War II. The last foreign leader they assassinated was a Japanese admiral. They shot down a Japanese warplane, but that was during a conflict, during a war. But in peacetime, assassinating a foreign leader was seen as having crossed a threshold, because this could set a precedent and could invite other foreign powers to do likewise. So he was addressing the critics at home and abroad, including critics within his own party. There are people the liberal element of the Republican Party, which sees Trump's Soleimani strike as being reckless. So he tried to combine different elements. There was a message for Iran, both a tough message as well as a attempt to cajole Iran and say that the U.S. is willing to do a deal with Iran, a deal that will help Iran to become a major power, a great power, as you put it.
Yeah, Mr. Agha, go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think now the back channel diplomacy will start.
I hope
because
so, yes.
both have got the, both are winner in this, because Iran has telling its people that
That
they have
80
taken their
Americans were
revenge,
killed. Yeah.
and the Americans
nobody
are
was
happy.
killed.
They have killed Soleimani, and a major factor, was spreading violence or spreading terrorism around the region. So now what next is negotiation. The Europe and India can play at the best role at the moment.
Right.
And we are in touch with American, the Iranians, Saudis and UAE, everybody, likewise Europe.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Aga, and Dr. Brahma Chellaney for joining us. At a time of immense tension in the region, a Ukrainian airliner with 176 on board crashed soon after taking off from Tehran.